Some financial mistakes don't ruin people immediately. They happen quietly, over years, almost invisibly, until one day someone reaches their late 50s and realizes they spent decades earning money without ever building real security. And in this video, I want to talk about the financial habits that quietly damage so many lives after 50.
Quiet wealth, calm finance, better life.
By the time most people reach their 50s, financial mistakes rarely look dramatic. They rarely resemble movie scenes. There is no sudden collapse, no catastrophic soundtrack. Instead, the damage usually accumulates slowly, quietly, one overlooked habit at a time. One delayed decision at a time. One emotional coping mechanism repeated for decades. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. Many intelligent, responsible, hard-working adults don't even realize these patterns are hurting them until retirement begins approaching visibly. Because by midlife, financial consequences become harder to postpone psychologically. Time suddenly feels measurable. The future feels closer. And small decisions that once seemed harmless begin revealing their long-term weight. Today, I want to talk honestly about some of the most common financial mistakes people make in their 50s. Not to shame anyone, not to create fear, but because awareness creates options. And sometimes, a single honest realization can quietly change the direction of the next 20 years. Living as though high-income years will last forever. One of the most common financial mistakes people make in their 50s is unconsciously assuming their strongest earning years will continue indefinitely. This assumption rarely feels reckless. In fact, it often feels normal, especially for people who spent decades building careers successfully. Income rises gradually, careers stabilize, lifestyle expands naturally alongside earnings. Larger homes, more expensive routines, higher monthly obligations, private schools, luxury habits, frequent upgrades, and eventually, what once felt aspirational becomes psychologically permanent. People stop viewing their lifestyle as optional. It simply becomes normal life. But midlife introduces an uncomfortable truth. Income is rarely guaranteed forever. Industries change. Health changes. Energy changes. Employers change. The market changes. And many adults quietly discover that maintaining a high-cost lifestyle later in life can become emotionally exhausting, especially when retirement begins appearing on the horizon. Because the problem is not only spending. The problem is dependency. Many people unintentionally build lives that require continuous high income simply to remain stable. And that creates vulnerability, particularly after 50. Confusing status with security. Another subtle financial mistake people make in midlife is confusing external success with internal stability. Modern culture rewards appearances aggressively, especially professional appearances. The right neighborhood, the right car, the right vacations, the right social image. And after decades inside achievement-driven environments, many adults begin unconsciously tying self-worth to visible financial performance. But appearances can be deeply misleading. Some people earning extraordinary incomes are quietly drowning in stress, debt, pressure, and emotional exhaustion. Because status often requires maintenance, and maintenance requires money continuously. This creates an exhausting cycle. People spend heavily to sustain lifestyles designed to communicate success, while privately feeling increasingly fragile underneath. Eventually, many discover something deeply uncomfortable. They look successful, but do not feel secure. That distinction matters enormously, because financial peace and financial appearance are not the same thing. Delaying financial honesty. One of the most emotionally damaging financial patterns after 50 is avoidance. Not dramatic irresponsibility, avoidance. Avoiding retirement projections, avoiding debt totals, avoiding difficult conversations with spouses, avoiding estate planning, avoiding healthcare cost discussions, avoiding reality itself. This happens more often than people realize, because uncertainty creates emotional discomfort, and human beings naturally avoid discomfort when overwhelmed, especially after decades of stress. Many adults quietly tell themselves, "I'll deal with it later." But later arrives faster in midlife, and avoidance becomes increasingly expensive emotionally. What makes this particularly painful is that uncertainty itself often creates more anxiety than reality. Many people suffer mentally for years because they are afraid to look honestly at their financial situation. But clarity, even imperfect clarity, usually creates more peace than avoidance ever does. Because clarity creates agency, and agency restores psychological stability. Trying to catch up too aggressively. Another major mistake many adults make in their 50s is attempting to compensate for lost time through excessive financial risk. This often begins emotionally. Someone realizes retirement is approaching. They compare themselves to others. Panic quietly begins growing underneath the surface. And suddenly, steady investing no longer feels emotionally satisfying. They want acceleration, fast recovery, rapid wealth creation. This emotional state becomes dangerous because desperation changes judgment. People become vulnerable to speculative investments, financial hype, guaranteed returns, and unrealistic promises, especially online. Unfortunately, midlife is often when people can least afford catastrophic losses emotionally. Not only financially, emotionally. Because recovering psychologically from major setbacks becomes harder later in life. This is why emotional regulation matters so profoundly in finance, especially after 50. Quiet wealth is rarely built through panic. It is usually built through consistency, restraint, and patience. Supporting everyone except themselves. Many adults in their 50s quietly become financial shock absorbers for entire families, helping children, helping aging parents, helping relatives through emergencies, providing support repeatedly. And while generosity can be beautiful, many people slowly sacrifice their own long-term stability, trying to rescue everyone else constantly. This creates enormous emotional conflict, because compassionate people naturally want to help, especially parents. But over time, some adults begin financing everyone's future except their own. This is particularly common among responsible, empathetic people who spent decades being dependable. But eventually, many discover an uncomfortable reality. Neglecting your future stability does not ultimately help the people you love. In fact, it may eventually create even greater pressure later. Financial self-preservation is not selfishness, especially after 50. It is preparation. Ignoring how expensive aging can become. One of the most underestimated realities of later adulthood is how financially connected health and aging truly become. Many people plan for retirement income. Far fewer emotionally prepare for healthcare realities. Medical expenses, long-term care, mobility limitations, unexpected illness, prescription costs, assisted living possibilities. These conversations feel emotionally uncomfortable, which is precisely why many people avoid them. But avoidance does not reduce vulnerability. Preparation does, especially later in life. And perhaps one of the hardest truths about aging is that financial resilience often determines emotional resilience as well. Because money later in life frequently represents access to care, access to options, access to dignity. That reality deserves thoughtful planning, not denial.
Remaining emotionally attached to spending identities. By midlife, many people have spent decades building identities around consumption patterns, certain restaurants, certain brands, certain lifestyles, certain environments. And over time, spending becomes emotionally symbolic. People are not only buying products, they are reinforcing identity, success, belonging, achievement. This is why simplifying financially later in life can feel psychologically difficult, because reducing expenses sometimes feels emotionally similar to losing status or losing part of yourself. But many financially healthy adults eventually experience an important psychological shift. They stop trying to display success constantly and begin prioritizing peace instead. This transition can feel profoundly liberating, because once people stop performing wealth, they often realize how little external validation truly improves emotional well-being.
Believing financial change must be dramatic. One of the most harmful misconceptions about money is believing meaningful financial improvement must happen dramatically. People imagine transformation through huge investments, massive breakthroughs, or sudden wealth. But most financially stable lives are not built dramatically. They are built quietly, through repeated, often unremarkable decisions sustained consistently over time. Cooking at home more often, reducing unnecessary subscriptions, paying down debt gradually, learning patiently, spending intentionally, investing steadily. These behaviours rarely look impressive online, but over 10 or 15 years, they can completely reshape a person's future, especially emotionally. Because stability creates psychological breathing room, and psychological breathing room changes how people experience daily life. Postponing the idea of enough. Modern culture encourages endless striving, more income, more upgrades, more achievement, more accumulation. But eventually, many adults reach a quiet moment where they begin asking a different question. How much is actually enough? This question matters deeply after 50, because endless financial striving can quietly consume emotional life itself. Some people spend decades chasing larger numbers without ever developing peace internally. And eventually, they discover something unsettling. They learned how to earn, but never learned how to feel secure. That distinction changes everything. Because financial well-being is partly mathematical, but also profoundly psychological. At some point, people must decide whether they are building wealth or endlessly chasing validation. The most damaging mistake of all.
Perhaps the most damaging financial mistake people make in their 50s is surrendering mentally, believing it's too late. There's no point anymore. I missed my chance. Because once hopelessness settles deeply enough, people stop taking constructive action entirely. They disengage emotionally from their own future, and that mindset quietly accelerates decline. But the future is rarely as fixed as people imagine. Human lives remain surprisingly adaptable far longer than most expect. Financial situations can improve, habits can improve, perspective can improve, and emotional healing around money can still happen later in life. Especially when people stop pursuing perfection and begin pursuing stability instead. What financially healthy people over 50 often do differently? Interestingly, financially healthy adults over 50 are rarely the loudest people in the room. They are usually not trying to impress strangers online. Instead, they often focus on quieter principles: clarity, consistency, simplicity, moderation, preparation. They know their numbers. They avoid unnecessary chaos. They protect their downside carefully. And perhaps most importantly, they build lives designed to remain emotionally sustainable. Because eventually, many adults realize a peaceful life is more valuable than a performative one. And that realization quietly changes everything.
If any part of this video felt familiar, please remember something important. Financial mistakes do not permanently define your future. Awareness matters more than shame. Honesty matters more than perfection. And small changes, repeated consistently over time, still have enormous power later in life, especially after 50. Because financial peace is rarely created through dramatic moments. More often, it is built slowly, through calmer decisions, healthier habits, and the willingness to face reality without giving up on yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if this channel helps you feel even slightly more grounded about money and the future, I hope you'll join us again. Quiet wealth is built slowly and lived fully.
Quiet wealth, calm finance, better life.